The morning bell rang through the hallways of Westfield Academy, and Miguel Alvarez kept his head down as he hurried to his locker. The 14-year-old boy moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of being invisible. His dark hair fell slightly over his eyes, providing a small shield from the stares that occasionally came his way. Miguel quickly exchanged his worn backpack for the books he needed for his morning classes. The backpack had been a find at the local thrift store 2 years ago. His grandmother had sewn patches over the fraying spots, and despite its age, Miguel kept it clean and organized. It was just one of many things that set him apart from the other students at Westfield Academy. "Nice shoes, Alvarez," a voice called out as a group of boys passed by. Miguel didn't look up. His sneakers, like most of his clothes, were well worn but clean. The white parts had long ago turned a stubborn gray that no amount of scrubbing could fix. Unlike his classmates who wore the latest styles, Miguel's wardrobe consisted of whatever his mother could find on clearance or at secondhand shops. The hallways of Westfield Academy gleamed with polish and privilege. Trophy cases lined the walls, showcasing generations of achievements from families who had attended the school for decades. Large donations from parents had funded the new science wing and the Olympic-sized swimming pool. Miguel sometimes felt like he was walking through a different world, one that he had accidentally stumbled into and would eventually be asked to leave. In his first class of the day, English literature, Miguel sat in the back row near the window. He liked this spot because it allowed him to remain unnoticed while still having a clear view of the board. As Mr. Thompson handed back their essays on Great Expectations, Miguel felt a small surge of pride when he saw the A written at the top of his paper. "Good insights on Pip's character development." "Miguel," Mr. Thompson said quietly as he passed. The teacher was one of the few who seemed to see past Miguel's worn clothes and quiet demeanor. During lunch, Miguel sat alone at the far end of a table, eating the sandwich his grandmother had prepared that morning. Around him, students chatted about weekend plans, skiing trips, shopping excursions to the city, and parties at large homes with swimming pools. Miguel listened without contributing, sometimes imagining what such lives must be like. Tina Chen, a girl from his math class, paused as she walked past. "Did you understand problem 7 from last night's homework?" she asked, seeming genuinely puzzled. Miguel nodded. "The trick is to factor the equation first before trying to solve for x," he explained, sketching a quick example on the corner of his notebook. Tina's eyes lit up with understanding. "That makes so much sense. Thanks, Miguel." She smiled and continued on her way to join her friends. These brief interactions were the extent of Miguel's social life at school. He wasn't bullied so much as overlooked, a background character in the daily drama of teenage life. And most days that was exactly how he preferred it. When the final bell rang, unlike most students who headed to sports practice or club meetings, Miguel walked the 2 miles home. The route took him through increasingly modest neighborhoods, until he reached the apartment complex where he lived with his grandmother. The building was old but maintained as well as the landlord's limited resources allowed. Faded paint covered the exterior, and a few persistent weeds pushed through cracks in the sidewalk. Miguel climbed the 3 flights of stairs, his legs tired but used to the daily climb. "Abuela, I'm home," he called as he entered the small apartment. Elena Alvarez looked up from her sewing with a warm smile that transformed her weathered face. At 68, she still had the energy of someone much younger, though arthritis had begun to stiffen her fingers. "How was school today, mijo?" she asked, setting aside the pants she was hemming for a neighbor. "It was fine," Miguel answered, the same response he gave every day. He didn't tell her about the comments about his shoes or how he'd eaten lunch alone again. Instead, he placed his A paper on the small kitchen table for her to see. His grandmother's face lit up with pride. "Look at that. You have your mother's brains, that's for sure." The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a combined kitchen and living area, but Elena kept it spotlessly clean. Family photos covered one wall, most featuring Miguel's mother, Lucia, at various ages. There were only a few that included Miguel's father, who had left when Miguel was 5, heading back to Mexico with promises to return that had never materialized. Miguel grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl, a luxury his grandmother insisted on despite their tight budget, and settled at the kitchen table to start his homework. The routine was familiar and comforting. He would work until 6 when his mother would call during her dinner break at the hospital where she worked as a cleaner. The phone rang right on schedule. "Hi, Mom," Miguel answered, trying to sound upbeat. "How's my brilliant boy today?" Lucia Alvarez's voice came through, tired but warm. "I got an A on my English paper." "That's wonderful. I knew you would. Mr. Thompson knows talent when he sees it." They chatted for her 15-minute break, Miguel carefully avoiding any mention of the social challenges at school. His mother worked too hard to worry about such things. After saying goodbye, he returned to his homework as his grandmother prepared a simple dinner of beans, rice, and the chicken that had been on sale at the grocery store. Later that evening, after his grandmother had gone to bed, Miguel sat by the window in their small living room. From there, he could see a sliver of the night sky between the buildings. His thoughts drifted to his mother, who wouldn't be home until after midnight. She worked 2 jobs, days at the hospital and evenings at an office building downtown, coming home just long enough to sleep before starting again. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional sounds from neighboring units. From somewhere came the faint notes of music, someone practicing piano, the melody drifting through the thin walls. Miguel closed his eyes and listened, his fingers unconsciously tapping against his leg in rhythm with the music. There was something about music that had always called to him. When he was younger, before they had moved to this town for his mother's job, their neighbor had been an old man who played violin. Miguel would sit on the steps of their building for hours, listening to the melodies that floated from the open window. The man had noticed his interest and sometimes played songs just for him, teaching Miguel to recognize Bach from Beethoven. Miguel had never mentioned this interest to anyone at Westfield. Music lessons and instruments were for kids whose parents could afford such luxuries. In a school where many students had been playing piano or violin since they were toddlers, his untrained appreciation seemed embarrassingly inadequate. Still, whenever Miguel passed the music room at school, he would slow down to peek through the small window in the door. Something about the instruments arranged around the room called to him, especially the cellos that stood in their stands, majestic and patient. Miguel sighed and turned back to his math textbook. Dreams were nice, but reality required focus. His mother worked too hard for him to waste time on impossibilities. The best he could do was excel in his classes and hope for scholarships that might someday help him attend college. The next morning followed the same pattern. Miguel woke early, made breakfast for himself and his grandmother, and prepared for school. His mother had left money for lunch on the counter with a note. "Proud of you always. Love, Mom." He folded the note carefully and tucked it into his pocket, a small talisman against the day ahead. At school, Miguel navigated the hallways with practiced ease, becoming part of the background. In chemistry class, they were assigned lab partners, and Miguel ended up working with David Palmer, one of the more popular boys. David looked momentarily disappointed at not being paired with one of his friends, but he nodded politely to Miguel. "I heard you're good at this stuff," David said as they set up their experiment. Miguel shrugged. "I like chemistry." They worked well together, with Miguel quietly guiding them through the steps while letting David handle most of the measurements. When they finished before the other teams, David looked at him with newfound respect. "You really are good at this," he said. "We should study together for the test next week." Miguel nodded, surprised by the offer but not expecting anything to come of it. Experience had taught him that such casual invitations rarely materialized into actual plans. As the day progressed, Miguel found himself thinking about the upcoming weekend. His mother had promised that she would have Sunday off, her first in 3 weeks. They planned to have a proper family breakfast together, something that rarely happened due to her work schedule. Walking home that afternoon, Miguel stopped at the small grocery store to buy eggs and a bit of fruit for Sunday's breakfast. He counted his money carefully, making sure he had enough for everything on his list. The cashier, Mrs. Patel, greeted him by name. "How is your grandmother today, Miguel?" she asked as she rang up his purchases. "She's good, thank you. Her arthritis isn't too bad this week." Mrs. Patel nodded and slipped an extra orange into his bag. "For your mother," she said with a wink. "Tell her I said hello." These small kindnesses were threads in the fabric of Miguel's life. Not enough to change his circumstances, but sufficient to remind him that he wasn't entirely alone in the world. As he climbed the stairs to their apartment, Miguel thought about his English assignment due the following week. A personal essay about challenges and growth. He had plenty of material to work with, but was unsure how much of his life he wanted to reveal to his teacher and classmates. Some things were easier kept private, like the fact that he sometimes helped his mother clean offices on weekends when they needed extra money, or that his winter coat had belonged to 3 other boys before him. Yet as he opened the door to the apartment, the familiar smell of his grandmother's cooking welcoming him home, Miguel realized that despite everything, he didn't feel sorry for himself. His life was harder than those of his classmates in many ways, but it had also taught him things they might never learn: resourcefulness, gratitude for small pleasures, and the quiet dignity that comes from doing your best with what you have. What he didn't know was that his carefully constructed routine was about to be completely upended, and the musical yearnings he kept hidden were about to take center stage in his life in ways he could never have imagined. The intercom crackled to life during third period, silencing Ms. Wilson's geometry lesson. Principal Richard Harmon's voice filled the classroom with its usual self-important tone. Miguel, who had been carefully drawing perfect angles, paused with his pencil hovering over his notebook. "Attention students and faculty," the principal announced. "I'm pleased to inform you that our annual spring showcase will take place 4 weeks from now on Friday evening. This prestigious event highlights the exceptional talents of our Westfield Academy students and will be attended by the school board, major donors, and several alumni who have gone on to achieve significant success in their fields." Around the classroom, students exchanged excited glances. The spring showcase was one of the biggest events of the year, a chance for students to shine and, as everyone knew, for their parents to network and make connections. As always, Principal Harmon continued, "Participation is by invitation only, ensuring we maintain the level of excellence Westfield is known for. Department heads will submit their nominations by the end of this week." When the announcement ended, the classroom filled with chatter. "My sister's doing a piano piece," said a boy near Miguel. "She's been practicing for months." "I heard they might invite the chamber quartet from last year," another student added. "My parents are bringing the Andersons, the ones with the foundation." Miguel turned back to his geometry work, tuning out the conversations. Events like the spring showcase weren't meant for students like him. He understood the unspoken rules of Westfield Academy. There were those who performed and those who watched, those who belonged and those who were merely tolerated. At lunch, Miguel ate quickly, wanting to use the remaining time to visit the library. As he passed through the main hallway, he noticed the door to the music room was open. Despite his better judgment, he slowed down and glanced inside. The room was empty of students, but instruments rested in their stands: violins, violas, flutes, and in the corner, the cellos that always caught his eye. One of them, older than the others with a rich dark wood finish, seemed to call to him. Miguel stood frozen in the doorway, imagining what it would be like to hold such an instrument, to draw a bow across its strings. "Admiring our collection, Mr. Alvarez?" Miguel jumped at the voice behind him. Principal Harmon stood there, his tall frame imposing in his perfectly tailored suit. His gray hair was cut short and precise, and his thin lips formed what might have been a smile but didn't reach his eyes. I was just passing by." "Sir?" Miguel stammered, already backing away. Principal Harmon's eyes narrowed slightly. "I wasn't aware you had any musical training." "I don't," Miguel admitted. "Not really. I just think they're beautiful instruments." "Indeed," the principal replied, though his tone suggested he found nothing beautiful about Miguel's presence near them. "Well, don't let me keep you from your lunch hour." Miguel nodded and hurried away, feeling the principal's gaze on his back. Principal Harmon had never made any secret of his views on the scholarship program that had brought students like Miguel to Westfield. Diversity initiatives, he called them in public, while making it clear in 100 subtle ways that he considered such students to be lowering the school's standards. For the rest of the day, Miguel couldn't shake the uneasy feeling from his encounter with the principal. He should have known better than to linger by the music room. At Westfield, it was safer to stick to the places where you belonged. 2 days later, signs appeared throughout the school announcing the selected performers for the spring showcase. Students gathered around the lists posted in the main hall, searching for their names. Miguel walked past without stopping. There was no reason for his name to be there. "Hey, Alvarez," called Bradley Wilson, one of the lacrosse players. "You're famous, man." Miguel froze, confused. Bradley pointed to the bottom of the list, grinning in a way that made Miguel's stomach tighten. There at the end, added in what looked like different handwriting from the rest. Was his name? Miguel Alvarez, cello solo. Must be a mistake, Miguel said, his mouth suddenly dry. No mistake, said Tina Chen, appearing beside him. She looked equally confused. They just announced it in music class. Principal Harmon himself added you to the program. Before Miguel could respond, the hallway speakers came to life again with Principal Harmon's voice. One additional announcement regarding the spring showcase. I'd like to personally congratulate Miguel Alvarez, who will be performing a special cello solo. It's important that our event represents the diverse backgrounds of our student body. The way he emphasized the word diverse made its meaning clear to everyone listening. Snickers rippled through the hallway. Miguel stood paralyzed as the bell rang and students began moving to their classes, many casting amused glances his way. You don't even play cello, do you? Asked a girl Miguel recognized from his Spanish class. No, he admitted quietly. Classic Harmon move, she muttered, shaking her head before continuing to her next class. Miguel was late to history class, slipping into his seat as Mr. Peterson was already discussing the French Revolution. Throughout the lesson, he felt the stares of his classmates and heard the occasional whisper, followed by muffled laughter. His face burned and he kept his eyes fixed on his textbook, not absorbing a single word on the page. When the final bell rang, Miguel considered hiding in the bathroom until the hallways cleared. But he knew he couldn't avoid this forever. As he walked toward his locker, David Palmer from chemistry class fell into step beside him. So, cello prodigy, huh? David said, but without the mocking tone Miguel had been hearing all day. It's obviously some kind of joke, Miguel replied, keeping his voice low. David frowned. Yeah, but not a very funny one. Look, everyone knows what Harmon's doing. He's trying to make some kind of point to the board about the scholarship program. Miguel stopped at his locker, twisting the combination with more force than necessary. I'll just tell him I can't do it. You know that's exactly what he wants, right? David leaned against the neighboring locker. He wants you to back out so he can tell everyone that students like you don't have the commitment or whatever. Miguel pulled his backpack from the locker, weighing David's words. What else can I do? I don't know how to play the cello. David shrugged. I don't know, man. But just think about it before you give him what he wants. He gave Miguel an awkward pat on the shoulder before heading off to lacrosse practice. Outside the school, Miguel started his usual walk home, his thoughts churning. He tried to imagine standing on stage with a cello he couldn't play, in front of an audience of wealthy parents and donors, all there to witness his humiliation. The thought made him feel physically ill, but David's words kept coming back to him. Principal Harmon had set this up specifically to make Miguel fail, to prove some point about students who didn't come from money, who didn't belong at Westfield Academy. As he walked, Miguel passed a small park where an older man often played guitar for tips. Today, the man was playing something classical, his fingers moving nimbly over the strings. Miguel slowed, listening to the familiar melody, one of the pieces his old neighbor used to play on violin. The man nodded to Miguel as he dropped his last quarter into the open guitar case. You like Bach? The guitarist asked. Yes, Miguel answered, surprised to be addressed. My neighbor used to play this. Good ears, the man said with a smile. Not many kids your age would recognize it. Miguel continued walking, the music following him for half a block before fading. A crazy thought began to form in his mind. What if he didn't back out? What if instead he actually tried to learn to play? 4 weeks wasn't much time, probably not nearly enough, but it would be better than giving Principal Harmon the satisfaction of seeing him quit. By the time Miguel reached the apartment, his grandmother was waiting with concern on her face. Your school called, she said as soon as he entered. Something about you performing in a concert? I told them there must be a mistake. Miguel set down his backpack, his decision made. It's not exactly a mistake, Abuela. Can we talk about it when Mom gets home? That evening, when Lucia Alvarez called during her dinner break, Miguel explained the situation as calmly as he could, leaving out the worst of the humiliation he'd felt. That man, his mother said, anger clear in her voice even through the phone. I should come to the school and— Mom, please, Miguel interrupted. That would only make things worse. I've been thinking, maybe I could try to learn, just enough to not completely embarrass myself. There was a long pause on the line. Miguel, honey, you know we can't afford lessons or to rent an instrument. I know, he said quickly. But I thought maybe. Remember Mrs. Rodriguez, whose house you used to clean? The one who taught music before she retired? His mother was quiet for a moment. Yes, I remember. She always asked about you. Do you think she might let me practice on her cello sometimes? I could offer to do yard work or something in exchange. Another pause. I can ask her. But Miguel, are you sure about this? No one would blame you for backing out. Miguel thought about Principal Harmon's smug face, about the students who had laughed, about David's words. I'm sure, Mom, I want to try. After hanging up, Miguel sat at the kitchen table, doubt already creeping in. What was he thinking? Learning to play the cello in 4 weeks was impossible. He was setting himself up for an even bigger humiliation. His grandmother sat across from him, her hands folded on the table. Tell me the truth now, mijo. Why is this principal putting you in this concert when you don't play music? Miguel looked at his grandmother's face, lined with years of hard work and sacrifice. She had raised his mother alone after his grandfather died, working cleaning jobs just as his mother did now. Neither of them had ever backed down from a challenge, no matter how unfair. He's trying to make me look bad, abuela, Miguel admitted. He thinks people like us don't belong at that school. Elena Alvarez's eyes hardened. And what do you think? Miguel straightened in his chair. I think I'm going to prove him wrong. His grandmother reached across the table and took his hand in hers. Then that's exactly what you'll do. The next afternoon, Miguel stood nervously on the porch of a small yellow house with a well-tended garden. His mother had called Mrs. Rodriguez that morning, and to Miguel's surprise, the retired music teacher had immediately invited him to come over after school. You must be Miguel, said the woman who opened the door. Mrs. Rodriguez was shorter than Miguel had expected, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a bun, and warm brown eyes behind round glasses. Your mother has told me so much about you over the years. Miguel smiled shyly. Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Rodriguez. Isabel, please, she corrected, ushering him inside. Any son of Lucia's is welcome in my home. The living room was cozy, with bookshelves lining one wall and framed photos covering another. But what immediately caught Miguel's attention was the cello standing in the corner near the window, its wood gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. So, Isabel said, settling into an armchair and gesturing for Miguel to sit on the sofa. Your mother tells me you've been volunteered for a cello performance. Miguel's face flushed. It's complicated. I have time, she replied simply, slowly. Miguel explained the situation, Principal Harmon's announcement, the snickering classmates, and his own determination not to back down. Isabel listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly troubled. This principal, she said when he finished. He sounds like a man who has forgotten what education is truly about. She shook her head. But that's a problem for another day. Right now we need to decide if this is really something you want to do. Miguel looked at the cello in the corner. I don't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me fail. That's not a good enough reason, Isabel said firmly. Learning an instrument takes passion, dedication. If you're only doing this out of pride or anger, you won't succeed. Miguel hesitated, then admitted something he had never told anyone. I've always wanted to learn. Ever since I was little and our neighbor would play violin. There's something about string instruments. He trailed off, embarrassed by his inability to express what he felt. Isabel studied him for a moment, then nodded. Very well. But you should know that what you're proposing is nearly impossible. Most students practice for years before performing solo. I know, Miguel said, but I have to try. Isabel rose from her chair. Then we'll start now. Come here. She guided Miguel to the cello and showed him how to sit, how to hold the instrument between his knees, how to position the bow. The cello felt both foreign and somehow familiar in his hands, larger and more unwieldy than he had imagined. Now, Isabel said, draw the bow across the open strings just to get a feel for it. Miguel did as instructed, wincing at the scratchy sound he produced. Isabel made a small adjustment to his hand position and nodded for him to try again. This time the note was clearer, resonating through the room. Good, she said. Now I need to know if you have any musical background at all. Can you read music? Miguel hesitated, then decided honesty was best. A little. I've been teaching myself. Isabel raised her eyebrows. Teaching yourself? How? YouTube tutorials mostly, Miguel admitted. And there's a music theory book in the school library I've been reading during lunch sometimes. I borrow sheet music from the music room when no one's around and try to follow along with videos. Show me, Isabel said, crossing to a bookshelf and retrieving a folder of sheet music. She selected a page and placed it on a stand in front of Miguel. Do you recognize this? Miguel studied the notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. Bach, he said finally. Cello Suite No. 1, the Prelude. Isabel's eyes widened slightly. That's correct. And could you hum it for me? Miguel closed his eyes and began to hum the familiar melody, his fingers instinctively moving as if playing along. When he opened his eyes, Isabel was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You have a good ear, she said quietly. Better than good. How long have you been studying music this way? Miguel shrugged, embarrassed. 3 years, maybe? Whenever I can. Isabel sat down, shaking her head slightly. 3 years of teaching yourself with no instrument, no proper instruction. She looked at him with new respect. Miguel, do you realize how extraordinary that is? Miguel felt his face grow warm. It doesn't matter, though, does it? I still can't actually play. Perhaps not yet, Isabel agreed, but you're not starting from nothing. She straightened her shoulders, making a decision. I'll help you, Miguel. I can't promise miracles, but I'll teach you what I can in the time we have. She went to her calendar on the wall. You can come here Monday, Wednesday, and Friday after school. 2 hours each session, and I'm going to lend you my practice cello to take home. Miguel's eyes widened. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, Isabel interrupted. It's my old one from college. It's seen better days, but it's still playable. You'll need to practice every spare moment if we're to have any chance at all. Miguel swallowed hard, overwhelmed by her generosity. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll work harder than you've ever worked before, Isabel replied. Now let's begin. For the next hour, Isabel taught Miguel the absolute basics. Proper posture, hand positions, how to tune the instrument. By the time he left, carrying the borrowed cello in its worn case, his fingers were already sore and his head was spinning with new information. When he arrived home, his grandmother took one look at the case and burst into tears. Abuela, what's wrong? Miguel asked, alarmed. Elena wiped her eyes. Nothing is wrong, mijo. It's just, your grandfather played cello when he was young. I never told you because it hurt too much to remember. He had to sell his instrument when your mother was born, to pay for the doctor. Miguel carefully set down the cello case and hugged his grandmother. I didn't know. How could you? She said, patting his cheek. But now I think perhaps some things are meant to be. That night, after finishing his homework, Miguel carefully opened the cello case. The instrument inside was indeed worn, with small scratches on its surface and a repaired crack along one side. But to Miguel, it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He positioned it as Isabel had shown him and began to practice the simple exercises she had taught him. In the small bedroom, the sound seemed impossibly loud, but his grandmother had insisted she didn't mind. Hours later, Miguel's fingers were raw and stiff, but he had managed to produce a scale that sounded almost like music. It was a tiny step, but it was something. The next day at school, whispers followed Miguel through the hallways. Word about the spring showcase had spread quickly, and most students assumed the whole thing was either a cruel joke by Principal Harmon or some misguided attempt at inclusion. I heard he's never even touched a cello before, one girl whispered as Miguel passed. My dad says it's ridiculous, another replied. The showcase is supposed to highlight the school's best talents, not turn into some charity event. Miguel kept his head down and focused on getting through the day. During lunch, he slipped away to the library and found a quiet corner where he could study his music theory book. Tina Chen found him there, sliding into the chair across from him. So you're really going through with this? She asked without preamble. Miguel nodded, not looking up from his book. Bold move, she said. Half the school thinks you're crazy. And the other half? Miguel asked, finally meeting her eyes. Tina grinned. The other half is hoping you'll somehow pull it off just to see Harmon's face. For the first time in days, Miguel smiled. You know, Tina said, leaning forward, I play violin in the orchestra. If you ever want to practice with someone who isn't, ancient, let me know. Before Miguel could respond, she was gone, leaving him staring after her in surprise. The days fell into a new routine. School, followed by lessons with Isabel 3 times a week and practice every moment in between. Miguel's fingertips developed calluses and his arms ached from holding the proper position. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to improve. 2 weeks before the showcase, Isabel had him attempt a simplified version of Bach's Prelude from Cello Suite No. 1, the piece he had always loved. "Remember," she instructed, "it's not about playing all the notes perfectly. It's about expressing what you feel through the music." Miguel took a deep breath and began to play. The opening notes were hesitant, a bit shaky, but as he continued, something shifted. He closed his eyes, letting the music flow through him. The notes he had heard in his head for years were finally coming from his own hands. When he finished, he opened his eyes to see Isabel watching him, her own eyes shining with unshed tears. "We have much work still to do," she said, her voice not quite steady. "But Miguel, you have the soul of a musician. That can't be taught." That night, as Miguel practiced in his room, his mother came home early from her evening job. She stood in the doorway listening, her face a mixture of pride and disbelief. "I had no idea," she said when he stopped playing. "When did you learn to love music like this?" Miguel shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I always have, I guess. I just never had a chance to show it." Lucia crossed the room and kissed the top of his head, something she hadn't done since he was small. "Well, now the whole world will see what I've always known, that my son is extraordinary." As the days passed and the showcase drew nearer, Miguel practiced until his fingers bled, then taped them up and practiced more. The piece was coming together, still imperfect but recognizable. Heartfelt. 1 week before the performance, Principal Harmon called Miguel to his office. "Mr. Alvarez," he said, his voice falsely pleasant, "I wanted to check on your progress for the showcase. I understand you've been attempting to learn the cello." Miguel met the principal's gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I have." "You know," Harmon said, leaning back in his chair, "there would be no shame in withdrawing. These events can be quite intimidating even for our most experienced performers." Miguel understood the offer for what it was, a chance to back out, to spare himself public humiliation. The principal clearly still expected him to fail. "Thank you for your concern," Miguel replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "But I'm looking forward to performing." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Harmon's face before his smile returned, colder than before. "Well then, I wish you the best of luck. You'll certainly need it." As Miguel left the office, he knew the principal was right about one thing. Luck alone wouldn't be enough. But Miguel had something more powerful on his side now. The music itself, and the determination to show everyone exactly what he was capable of. The night of the spring showcase arrived with a sky full of stars and a cool breeze that rustled the new leaves on the trees outside Westfield Academy. Inside the school auditorium, workers were arranging chairs, adjusting spotlights, and setting up a table near the entrance for programs and refreshments. Miguel stood backstage, peering through a gap in the curtains. The empty seats would soon be filled with parents in expensive clothes, school board members, and donors who wrote checks with more zeros than his mother earned in a year. His stomach tightened into a knot. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," said a voice behind him. Miguel turned to see Tina Chen, elegant in a black dress, her violin case in hand. "That might be less scary," Miguel admitted. Tina laughed. "You'll be fine. Remember what you played at lunch yesterday? It was really good." The past week had seen an unexpected development. After overhearing Miguel practicing in an empty classroom during lunch, Tina had started joining him, offering tips from her own experience. Their informal practice sessions had drawn curious onlookers, including David Palmer and a few other students who had begun to look at Miguel differently. "That was just a few people," Miguel said. "This is..." He gestured toward the auditorium, which could seat 400. "Just think of it as a bigger classroom," Tina suggested. "Or better yet, don't think about the audience at all. Just focus on the music like Isabel taught you." Miguel nodded, trying to calm his racing heart. He had been practicing 8 hours a day for the past week, pushing himself beyond exhaustion. Isabel had finally declared yesterday that he needed to rest his fingers and mind before the performance. "Remember," she had told him, "perfection is not the goal. Connection is. Make them feel something." Now, as he moved away from the curtain to tune his cello, Isabel's good one, which she had insisted he use for the performance, Miguel tried to focus on the music rather than his fear. The backstage area was filling up with other performers. The jazz ensemble was warming up in one corner, while the advanced chamber group tuned their instruments in another. Everyone seemed to know exactly what they were doing, confident in their years of training. Miguel felt like an imposter among them. A tall boy with a violin tucked under his arm stopped beside Miguel. "Hey, you're the scholarship kid who's playing solo, right?" Miguel nodded, bracing himself for mockery. Instead, the boy held out his hand. "Philip Harrison. I'm first violin in the chamber group. Heard you practicing yesterday. Bach, right? Bold choice." "Thanks," Miguel said, shaking his hand, surprised by the friendly gesture. "Just a tip," Philip added. "The acoustics in this place are weird. The sound bounces back a half beat later than you'd expect, so don't let it throw you off." Before Miguel could thank him, Philip was called away by his group. The small act of kindness helped steady Miguel's nerves, if only slightly. Ms. Reynolds, the music teacher, began organizing the performers in order of appearance. Miguel was scheduled last, a placement that Principal Harmon had insisted on, ensuring that his performance would be the final impression left on the audience. "Has anyone seen Principal Harmon?" Ms. Reynolds asked, checking her clipboard. "He's greeting the board members in the lobby," someone replied. Miguel used the opportunity to peek through the curtains again. The auditorium was beginning to fill. He spotted David's parents looking important in the third row. Near the front, several older men and women who had to be board members were taking their seats, programs in hand. Then, in the back row, he saw them. His mother and grandmother, dressed in their Sunday best. His mother looked tired after her shift at the hospital, but her face was shining with pride. Beside her sat Isabel, elegant in a deep blue dress that Miguel had never seen before. The sight of them there supporting him brought a lump to his throat. Whatever happened tonight, he wouldn't be facing it alone. 5 minutes, everyone," Ms. Reynolds announced. "Take your places if you're in the opening number." The jazz ensemble moved toward the stage entrance. Miguel retreated to a quiet corner, closed his eyes, and ran through the piece in his mind one more time, his fingers moving in silent practice. From beyond the curtain came the sound of Principal Harmon's voice, smooth and practiced, welcoming everyone to Westfield Academy's annual spring showcase. He spoke of excellence and tradition, of the school's commitment to developing extraordinary talent. "This evening," the principal said, his voice carrying clearly backstage, "you will witness the remarkable abilities that proper training and dedication can produce. These young performers represent the very best of what Westfield has to offer." There was a pause, and Miguel could almost feel the principal's smug smile as he added, "And as a special addition to our program tonight, we'll close with a demonstration of our inclusive approach to education." The thinly veiled condescension in his tone made Miguel's resolve harden. He would not give Principal Harmon the satisfaction of seeing him fail. The showcase began. One by one, the performers took the stage, pianists playing complex sonatas, the jazz ensemble swinging through a Duke Ellington piece, vocalists performing operatic arias. Each act was met with enthusiastic applause. Miguel watched from the wings, his anxiety growing with every polished performance. Even with weeks of intense practice, he wasn't at their level. Not even close. "You're up next, Mr. Alvarez," Ms. Reynolds said, checking her list. "Ready?" Miguel nodded, not trusting his voice. He picked up Isabel's cello and bow, feeling the weight of them, the smooth wood cool against his hands. On stage, the chamber group was finishing their piece, a complex Vivaldi concerto performed with technical brilliance. As they took their bows to thunderous applause, Miguel felt a moment of pure panic. How could he possibly follow that? Then Principal Harmon was on stage again, his smile tight as he approached the microphone. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our final performance of the evening." He paused, surveying the audience. "As you know, Westfield Academy prides itself on excellence. However, we also believe in opportunities for all. Tonight, Miguel Alvarez, one of our scholarship students, will attempt a cello solo." The emphasis on attempt was subtle but unmistakable. A murmur ran through the audience, and Miguel saw several people exchange glances. "I should note," the principal continued, "that Mr. Alvarez has only been playing the cello for a few weeks. We ask for your understanding." With that parting shot, he left the stage, passing Miguel in the wings with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good luck," he said, in a tone that suggested luck wouldn't be enough. Miguel took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding, making it hard to see the audience. but he could feel hundreds of eyes on him as he placed his chair and positioned his cello. For a moment, the only sound was the faint squeak of his chair as he settled into position, then silence, expectant, heavy with anticipation. Miguel closed his eyes. He thought of his mother working double shifts to keep him at this school, of his grandmother's stories about the grandfather he never knew, who had sacrificed his own music for his family, of Isabel, who had believed in him when he barely believed in himself. He opened his eyes, raised his bow, and began to play. The opening notes of Bach's prelude filled the auditorium, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. Miguel's fingers found the strings with growing confidence as he lost himself in the familiar melody. He was aware of small mistakes, a slightly missed note here, a tiny hesitation there, but he kept playing, letting the music flow through him. As Isabel had taught him, he focused not on technical perfection but on the emotion of the piece, its beauty and depth. Halfway through, something shifted. The nervousness fell away and Miguel was no longer thinking about the audience or Principal Harmon or even what note came next. He was simply playing, connected to the music in a way he had never experienced before. The final notes resonated through the silent auditorium. For a heartbeat, there was no sound at all. Then from somewhere in the audience, a single person began to clap. Another joined in, then another. Suddenly, the entire auditorium erupted in applause, not the polite, measured appreciation that had followed other performances, but something louder, more spontaneous. Miguel opened his eyes, momentarily disoriented. Through the glare of the spotlights, he could make out people standing, first a few, then more, until it seemed the whole audience was on their feet. As his eyes adjusted, he saw his mother and grandmother in the back, both crying openly. Isabel beside them, her hands clasped over her heart. Even some of his classmates were standing. Tina Chen whistling loudly from the wings, and in the front row, Principal Harmon sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. Miguel rose shakily to his feet and bowed the way Isabel had shown him. The applause grew even louder. He couldn't understand it. His performance hadn't been technically perfect, not even close to the level of the other musicians. Yet something about it had clearly touched the audience in a way he hadn't expected. As he left the stage, still dazed, he was met by Ms. Reynolds, her eyes wide with astonishment. "Miguel," she said, "where did you learn to play like that?" Before he could answer, he was surrounded by other performers offering congratulations and questions. The chamber group violinist Philip clapped him on the shoulder. "Not bad for a few weeks of practice," he said with a grin. "Not bad at all." Miguel barely had time to place the cello carefully in its case before his mother and grandmother pushed through the crowd, enveloping him in hugs. "My boy," his mother whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "My beautiful, talented boy." Isabel stood a few steps back, her eyes shining with tears and pride. "I told you," she said simply. "You have the soul of a musician." As the crowd around him continued to grow, Miguel caught sight of Principal Harmon standing at the edge of the stage, his face unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met across the room. Miguel didn't smile or gloat. He simply looked back, steady and unafraid, no longer the invisible boy trying to hide in the background. Principal Harmon was the first to look away. The morning after the spring showcase, Miguel woke to the sound of his grandmother humming in the kitchen. For a moment he lay still, wondering if the previous night had been a dream. His fingers were sore, the calluses tender, and his shoulders ached from holding the cello, real, physical proof that it had all happened. When he entered the kitchen, his grandmother turned from the stove with a bright smile. "There he is," she said proudly. "Our musician." Miguel ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. On the small kitchen table, his mother had left a note before heading to her early morning shift. "The whole hospital will know about my son, the cellist, today. Love you, Mom." Beside the note was the morning newspaper, folded open to a small article about the spring showcase. Miguel skimmed it quickly, his eyes widening when he saw his name. But the highlight of the evening was an unexpected performance by freshman Miguel Alvarez, whose moving interpretation of Bach captivated the audience. "Don't let it go to your head," his grandmother said, setting a plate of eggs in front of him. "Fame is like salt. A little adds flavor to life, too much ruins everything." Miguel laughed. "I don't think one newspaper mention counts as fame, Abuela." "It's a beginning," she replied, tapping the paper with her finger. Just remember who you are. At school, things were noticeably different. As Miguel walked through the hallways, students who had never spoken to him before nodded or called out greetings. In his math class, the teacher mentioned his performance before starting the lesson, causing several students to turn and look at him with newfound interest. During lunch, Miguel sat at his usual table, but he wasn't alone for long. Tina dropped her tray across from him, followed by David and 2 other students from the chamber group. "The music department is buzzing about you," Tina informed him. "Ms. Reynolds can't stop talking about your natural musicality and emotional depth." Miguel poked at his food, not sure how to handle this sudden attention. "It wasn't that good, technically speaking." Philip, the violinist, shook his head. "Technique is just the beginning. What you did, connecting with the audience like that, some people practice for decades and never manage it." "Are you going to keep playing?" David asked. "The orchestra could use another cellist." Before Miguel could answer, a hush fell over the cafeteria. Principal Harmon was walking through, his face set in grim lines. As he passed their table, his eyes met Miguel's briefly, then slid away without acknowledgement. "He hasn't said a word about last night," Tina whispered once the principal was out of earshot. "Not one word about any of the performances." "What did you expect?" Philip asked. "He set Miguel up to fail and it backfired spectacularly. My dad's on the board, and he said there were some pretty intense discussions after the showcase." Miguel was saved from responding by the bell signaling the end of lunch. As he gathered his things, he wondered what would happen next. The principal's plan had failed, but Miguel doubted a man like Richard Harmon would simply accept defeat. After school, Miguel headed to Isabel's house as he had every Monday, Wednesday and Friday for the past month. But today felt different. Without the pressure of the upcoming performance, he wasn't sure what to expect. Isabel greeted him with a warm hug. "I've had 7 phone calls about you since last night," she told him, leading him into the living room where tea was already set out. "Including one from Westfield's music department." Miguel set down his backpack. "Ms. Reynolds? What did she want?" "To thank me for working with you, and to ask if you might consider joining the orchestra." Isabel smiled. "I told her that decision was entirely up to you." Miguel looked at the cello in the corner, Isabel's good one that he had used for the performance. "I need to return this to you." "Actually," Isabel said, "I was hoping you might continue your lessons. That is, if you're interested." "Really?" Miguel asked, unable to hide his surprise. "Even though the showcase is over?" Isabel looked at him seriously. "Miguel, did you think I was only teaching you for that one performance? Talent like yours doesn't come along often. It would be a crime to let it go to waste." "But I can't afford lessons," Miguel said, the familiar weight of financial reality settling on his shoulders. "We'll work something out," Isabel said firmly. "Perhaps you could help me in the garden, or with organizing my sheet music. I've been meaning to catalog my collection for years." Before Miguel could respond, there was a knock at the door. Isabel went to answer it, returning a moment later with an unexpected visitor. "Ms. Reynolds, I hope you don't mind my stopping by," the music teacher said. "I tried to catch Miguel at school, but he'd already left." Miguel stood, suddenly nervous. "Is something wrong?"